Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and lately I've had several people level criticism at me that's really hilarious for anyone who kind of watches the history of what I promote here, that Jason Blaha only cares about the power lifts, the big three, the squat, the bench, and the deadlift, and he doesn't care about any other exercises. And that's really kind of hilarious because, yeah, I was getting back into competing in powerlifting when I started the channel. I've done powerlifting meets since I've been on YouTube, and then I quit utilizing both the squat and the bench press. In fact, I went over a year without doing 2 out of the 3 power lifts. You guys remember that I quit benching, then I went over and just did incline for a while and dips, and then I switched exclusively to standing overhead presses and different variations of it. You guys have seen me do at least 4 different variations of the overhead press. Because I think standing pressing is overall slightly more athletic. I quit squatting and I only recently started squatting again. I started front squatting and then I went back to the back squat, and I'm trying to build that back up to 500 pounds raw. But the whole point is that I don't know where people would get this idea, because I've also, how many exercises have I done? I've done weighted dips, weighted chin-ups, I've done T-bar rows on camera, various types of curls, multiple types, at least 3 different types of tricep extensions. But yeah, I mean, I've done a lot of different exercises and promoted a lot of different exercises and variations for just general build-up and hypertrophy and strength and things like that. But here's kind of the bizarre point. But here's another thing to factor in. I think there are a lot of people out there who shy away from these lifts because they're scared to do lifts that have strength standards. Because the squat, bench, and deadlift were not invented by powerlifting. Let's be realistic here. There are far more people who have trained the squat, bench, and deadlift for athletic purposes than there are competitive powerlifters in the world. All right, I can assure you more people have done those 3 exercises to get better at football than people who have ever stepped on a powerlifting platform. All powerlifting did was take 3 extremely popular, and they actually had more than 3 when they started, they trimmed it down to 3, but taking several extremely popular, big compound movements used by both athletes and bodybuilders for decades and put in a standardized set of rules so that you could compare one person's strength to another. That's all they did. They put in rules so that you can compare their strength levels. And that's the thing. A lot of these lifts, we don't have strength standards for different lifts. And if you don't have rules in place and you don't have strength standards, it's just not a fair assessment to compare 2 different people. I mean, a perfect example, not the best example, but you take something like the weighted dip versus the bench press. They're both fantastic exercises. Is anyone going to argue that you can't build a lot of chest and tricep and front delt mass and just a lot of mass in your upper body doing either of those exercises? They build pretty much the same muscles with a little bit of variation. They build the same muscles. One of them is easier to judge the strength standards on. It's easier to determine a consistency. And that's important for both comparing individuals as well as your own training programming. If you're trying to utilize an effective progression pattern or track your training over time, if you're performing a bench press full range of motion, you do the basic things, keep your butt on the bench, your feet don't move, those little things, you actually touch your chest, pause for a brief microsecond on your chest, and then press it up to a lockout, you will know if you've gotten stronger or not by how many reps you can do or how much weight you can do. There's no variation there. You know that your strength has either gone up or down, and you don't need a camera watching you to determine it. Whereas when you take a dip, how do you compare 2 people? How do you determine where the full range of the motion of the exercise is? Because the terminal range of motion on a dip is actually harmful. If you go all the way down, it could cause injury. So when you're trying to compare different people, the amount of forward lean that some person can balance versus another, due to different levers and stuff, is going to be different, dramatically different. Well, the more forward lean you get, probably the more weight you can lift. Also trying to figure out where is your exact range of motion on the exercise can be difficult, because even if we were to apply a parallel rule with the joints, the shoulder joint versus the elbow like we do for a squat, you can't feel that yourself like you can on certain exercises. So you can't compare one person to the next as easily. Is that person's 20 pound or 30 pound bigger dip really stronger than another's? We don't know. And it becomes a problem for you writing your own training programming. It can be a little hard to determine if you've progressed or not on that. And that's not saying the dip is a bad exercise. The dip is an amazing exercise. It's a great exercise. But how do you compare that? That's kind of the problem we run into when we deal with exercises outside of that. It's fine to do other exercises, but we only really have strength standards for about 6 exercises, right? And you can find those. They're accumulated. There are people who are long-term researchers in the field of sports sciences who compile massive amounts of data observing athletes, and they have charts for strength expectations and standards of where you sit in a progression pattern based upon your body weight versus how much you can lift. And we have universal strength standards for the squat, the bench press, the deadlift, but also the press, which means a standing press with your knees locked, the strict press, the power clean, and the power snatch. Like, we have strength standard charts that any person can easily find. In fact, if you just type in strength standards chart in Google, you'll pull all of that up. There's at least one site that has the quickest access, but they are all over the place. These are well-known things. You can see how your progression stacks up to others. And that only matters if you're comparing 2 people, but you don't compare any person's strength to another and say, hey, this guy's stronger than another because they lift more weight. Well, if they're not doing the same exercise, it doesn't matter, because you guys would be totally shocked. I mean, everyone wants me to address, for example, the Alpha Destiny video of him doing whatever is called a hack deadlift, I think, behind the back deadlift with 655. Okay, but he also trains the sumo deadlift, and the best sumo deadlift he's attempted and still failed on camera was 585. He failed the lift. Using any valid strength comparison, he would be ruled to be not able to sumo deadlift 585 because he didn't perform the exercise in a manner that showed he could complete the repetition. He didn't complete the repetition. He, 1, hitched at the top. 2, he didn't lock it out. So in other words, he wasn't physically strong enough, and that's setting aside the fact the guy used straps. He said, let's set that aside, the straps aside, because that would be a big, that doesn't count. On any strength standards chart, they specifically say that when you read the definitions of those charts, straps wouldn't be allowed. But he failed 585. So we know that his deadlift is less than 585. So you have some idea of how strong a guy like that is, trying to do a comparison. So if he does a different variation in which he can suddenly lift more weight, it means that that exercise is probably an exercise that a person can lift more weight on if they actually train it, which is a reasonable assumption given that we don't have strength standards on it, but we've only seen, 2 people on YouTube doing that lift? Both of them deadlift with any variation off the floor with a normal barbell, less weight than that, considerably less. I think people pointed that out, that Eric Bugenhagen can, behind the back deadlift, almost 200 pounds more than he sumo deadlifts. It looks like Alpha Destiny is probably 100 pounds difference. So you guys see the point? We don't have any strength standards for that lift, but the few people who do it can lift more weight on it. So a reasonable person could assume, well, it's probably a slightly easier exercise to perform pound per pound. Now, that's all we know. Just like we know that a trap bar deadlift, you should be able to lift more weight with a trap bar deadlift than with a barbell. That's understood. So the point is that without universal strength standards, you have no way to compare one person to another. By having standardized lifts with standardized rules, which a large number of athletes have performed, tens of thousands of athletes have trained for many years, we can assess what a strength expectation is, and that's it. Now, it's also fair to say that all of those lifts put a lot of muscle and a lot of strength on you. So what I would ask someone, I said, well, if you wanted someone to get really big and strong, if you wanted to get someone really big and really strong, what would be wrong with them doing those 6 lifts that we have standards on? I'm not saying that's always the best way to do it, but I don't think anyone could reasonably argue who's ever coached athletes that if you had someone get really good at those 6 exercises and probably not much else, if they wouldn't be big and be strong. They would be. Another perfect example of someone promoting a similar idea, I've always told people you can get really big and strong on 5 or 6 exercises if you master them. Look at someone like the Golden One, and I know he doesn't get a lot of popularity on YouTube because of his political views, but guy, by even bodybuilding standards, has a great physique. The guy is really strong, competes in strongman and powerlifting, and what does he tell people? He tells people that he built his aesthetics using 5 exercises, and that if a person really gets a strength base on those 5 lifts, that they will be reasonably aesthetic relative to their frame and their genetics. And he says the squat, the bench press, the deadlift, but he also says the push press and the weighted chin up. Martin Birkin taught almost the same thing: squat, bench, deadlift, overhead press, weighted chin up. That if you got as strong as possible on those 5 lifts, you would probably be about as big as your frame will allow, and you'll have a reasonably balanced body. What's wrong with that? What's wrong with that? It's been proven time and time again, and plenty of people who have results promote the same thing. It's not the only way to do it, but it's been proven to work. Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.